The mining station horizon floated in the empty space between two dead stars, where humans worked day and night pulling rare metals from asteroids that drifted like giant rocks in an endless black ocean. Jake Morrison had been working there for 3 years, fixing broken equipment and making sure the life support systems kept everyone breathing in the cold darkness of space. Every morning at 600 hours, Jake would wake up in his small room that was barely bigger than a closet and put on his orange work suit that smelled like machine oil and recycled air. He would eat the same protein paste breakfast that tasted like cardboard mixed with vitamins, then walk through the long metal corridors to the repair bay where broken mining drones waited for his attention like wounded animals. Life on Horizon was predictable and boring, which was exactly how the company wanted it, because bored workers caused less trouble than excited ones. Jake had gotten used to the routine, until the day the diplomatic ship arrived carrying passengers from the elf colonies in the Andromeda sector. The elves were allies of humanity, but they rarely visited human stations because they found them ugly and primitive compared to their crystal cities that floated in nebulas. Jake watched from a viewing window as the silver ship docked with movement so smooth it seemed to be dancing rather than flying. He was fixing a broken gravity generator when he heard the commotion in the cargo bay below, and since the generator was not going anywhere, Jake decided to investigate what could possibly make the usually quiet cargo workers sound so excited. The cargo bay was massive, with ceilings that stretched up 50 feet and walls lined with containers full of processed metals waiting to be shipped back to Earth. Jake saw a crowd of workers gathered in a circle, all staring at something in the center. When Jake pushed through the crowd, he saw her for the first time and his heart forgot how to beat properly. Luna stood in the center of the circle with skin that seemed to glow with its own soft light, and silver hair that moved like it was underwater, even though the artificial gravity was working perfectly. Her pointed ears marked her as an elf. But it was the three creatures wrapped around her body that made everyone stare. The dragons were small, each about the size of a house cat, but they were definitely dragons with scales that shimmered and changed color as they moved, tiny wings that folded against their bodies and eyes that held intelligence far beyond any animal. The smallest one was wrapped around her left arm, its scales shifting from deep purple to electric blue as it watched the humans with curious golden eyes. The middle dragon rested on her shoulders like a living scarf, its copper scales catching the harsh industrial lights and making them look beautiful somehow. The largest dragon coiled around her waist, like a belt made of silver and starlight, occasionally lifting its head to taste the air with a forked tongue that sparkled. Luna was talking to the cargo supervisor, a fat man named Bill, who was sweating despite the cool temperature of the bay. She needed special supplies, she said in a voice that sounded like wind chimes mixed with distant thunder. Her dragons required a specific type of crystal that only grew in the dangerous asteroid fields beyond the safe mining zones. Bill was shaking his head and explaining that company policy did not allow ships to go into those areas because too many had been lost to the gravity storms and rogue asteroids that moved in unpredictable patterns. The insurance alone would cost more than the station made in a year. Jake found himself moving forward before he could think about what he was doing, and when Luna turned to look at him, her eyes were the color of nebulas with flecks of gold that seemed to move like tiny stars. Her gaze made him feel like she could see through his work suit and skin right into his soul. She asked if he was a pilot, and Jake heard himself saying yes, even though he only had a basic flight certification from his training 5 years ago. The smallest dragon unwrapped itself from her arm and flew over to him, hovering in front of his face with wings that hummed like a hummingbird. The dragon chirped a sound like electronic music mixed with birdsong, and Luna smiled, showing teeth that were perfectly white and slightly sharper than human teeth. Oh, said the dragon liked him, which was rare, because usually they tried to bite humans who got too close. Jake asked why she needed the crystals, and Luna explained that her dragons were sick with a disease that was killing all the dragons in the galaxy, and these crystals were the only medicine that could slow down the illness. Without them, her 3 companions would die within a month, and they were the last of their kind in this sector of space. The crowd of workers had grown larger, and someone said that helping her would be suicide because everyone knew the outer asteroid fields were full of pirates and worse things that lived in the darkness between rocks. Some even said there were ghost ships out there full of crews that had gone mad from isolation But Jake looked at the small dragon that was now perched on his shoulder, making soft purring sounds, and he knew he could not let these creatures die just because it was dangerous. He told Luna he would take her to get the crystals. If she could get a ship, Luna touched his hand and her skin felt like warm silk mixed with electricity, as she said he was either very brave or very stupid, but either way she was grateful. The next 3 days passed in a blur of secret planning and careful preparation, because Jake knew that if the station management found out what he was planning, they would fire him immediately and probably arrest him for theft of company property. Luna had managed to secure a small courier ship from the elf diplomatic vessel, claiming she needed it for a cultural survey of the asteroid belt, which was technically not a lie. Jake spent his off hours studying star charts of the outer belt, memorizing the locations of the largest asteroids and the patterns of the gravity storms that swept through the area, like invisible hurricanes. Every night he would meet Luna in an unused storage room where she taught him basic elf navigation techniques that used intuition and feeling rather than just instruments and mathematics. The dragons had grown weaker even in just 3 days, and Jake could see their scales were less bright and their movement slower. The smallest one, who Luna called Spark, spent most of its time sleeping curled up in her lap. The middle dragon, named Copper, could barely fly anymore, and the largest one, called Silver, had stopped eating completely. Luna never showed fear, but Jake could see the worry in her eyes when she thought he was not looking. She told him stories about her homeworld where dragons once flew in flocks of thousands, filling the skies with their songs and painting the clouds with their fire breath. Now only a few hundred remained in the entire galaxy, and most of those were dying on. The night they planned to leave, Jake could not sleep and found himself walking through the station one last time, saying goodbye to places he had spent 3 years of his life. The repair bay where he had fixed countless machines, the cafeteria where he had eaten terrible food with friends who would probably never understand why he left, and the observation deck where he would sometimes sit and watch the stars. He met Luna at the docking bay at midnight, and she had changed from her diplomatic robes into something that looked like armor, made of liquid metal that flowed over her body like water. The dragons were in a special carrier that kept them warm and supplied them with oxygen because they were too weak to travel on their own. The courier ship was beautiful compared to the ugly mining vessels Jake was used to, with smooth lines and controls that responded to touch like they were reading his mind. Luna sat in the co-pilot seat, and her presence made the small cockpit feel both smaller and somehow infinite at the same time. They launched without permission, using a fake flight plan Jake had filed that showed them doing a routine inspection of the inner belt mining sites. As soon as they were out of sensor range, Jake changed course toward the outer belt where no sane person went without a full military escort. The journey took 6 hours through increasingly dangerous space where asteroids moved in chaotic patterns and strange energy readings made the instruments go crazy. Luna sang to keep the dragons calm, and her voice filled the ship with a warmth that made Jake forget they were flying toward almost certain death. The asteroid field they needed to reach was called the Garden by the few pilots who had seen it and lived to tell about it. It was a hollow asteroid the size of a small moon that had somehow developed its own atmosphere and ecosystem inside. Crystals grew there that existed nowhere else in the known galaxy, and many people believed it was an ancient elf temple from before humans even existed. As they approached the garden, Jake saw why most ships never made it this far. The asteroids here did not follow normal physics, but seemed to move with purpose, like they were alive and hunting anything that entered their territory. Luna put her hand on his shoulder and told him to stop thinking with his human brain and start feeling with his heart. Jake closed his eyes and let instinct guide, his hands on the controls, dodging asteroids that came from impossible angles and navigating through passages that should have been too small for their ship. Behind them, he heard Luna gasp, and when he opened his eyes, he saw they were being followed by 3 ships with no identification markers. Pirates were common in the outer belt because there was no law enforcement this far from civilization, and they would kill them for the ship alone, not even knowing about the valuable dragons Luna was carrying. Jake pushed the ship harder, weaving between asteroids at speeds that made the hull groan in protest. One of the pirate ships clipped an asteroid and exploded in a ball of silent fire, but the other 2 kept coming, firing energy weapons that turned smaller rocks into dust. Luna began singing louder, and Jake felt something change in the space around them, like reality itself was bending to her will. The asteroids began moving differently, forming a path that led straight to the garden, while simultaneously creating a wall behind them that the pirates could not penetrate. Jake did not question the impossible thing that was happening, but followed the path as fast as the ship could go. They burst through the surface of the garden, like diving into water, and suddenly they were inside a vast cavern filled with blue light from millions of crystals that grew from every surface. The air was breathable according to the sensors, and gravity was somehow Earth normal, despite the asteroid not being nearly massive enough to generate it. Luna opened the carrier and the dragons immediately perked up, their eyes growing brighter as they breathed in the crystal-charged air. Spark tried to fly and managed a few feet before landing. On Jake's shoulder, chirping excitedly, Copper stretched his wings and breathed a small jet of flame that was stronger than Jake had ever seen, and Silver lifted his great head and sang a note that harmonized with the crystals, making them glow brighter. Landed the ship on a flat crystal formation, and Luna practically ran outside with Jake following, carrying the dragons who were too excited to stay still. The crystals they needed were deep in the cavern, she said, and they would need to hurry because the pirates would find a way in eventually. The path deeper into the garden was marked by ancient symbols that Luna could read, but Jake could only see as pretty patterns in the crystal walls. She translated some of them, saying they told the story of how dragons and elves had once lived together here before a great war scattered them across the galaxy. As they walked deeper, the crystals grew larger and more beautiful, until they reached a chamber where crystals the size of trees grew from, floor to ceiling, pulsing with their own inner light. Luna said these were the medicine crystals and began carefully harvesting small pieces while the dragons flew around the chamber singing with joy. That was when Jake heard footsteps echoing from the path behind them and knew their time had run out. Jake grabbed the emergency plasma cutter from his belt, while Luna continued gathering crystals with movements that were almost too fast for human eyes to follow. The footsteps grew louder, and Jake could hear voices now rough and angry discussing how much they could sell elf organs for on the black market, which made his blood burn with rage. 3 pirates entered the crystal chamber wearing mismatched armor and carrying weapons that looked like they had been assembled from spare parts. Their leader was a woman with scars covering half her face and cybernetic implants where her left eye should have been. She smiled when she saw Luna, and it was the kind of smile that made Jake want to put himself between her and anything good in the universe. The scarred woman said they had been watching the diplomatic ship for weeks, waiting for someone to be stupid enough to come out here alone, and that elf dragons would sell for enough credits to retire on if they could keep them alive long enough to reach a buyer. She pointed her weapon at Luna and told her to call the dragons over, or she would start shooting pieces off the human. Luna stood slowly, still holding a handful of glowing crystals, and her voice was calm when she said that anyone who tried to harm dragons would face the curse of the Ancient Ones. The pirates laughed because everyone knew curses were just superstition, but Jake noticed that the crystals in the chamber had started pulsing faster. The smallest dragon, Spark, suddenly dove at the scarred woman, breathing a stream of blue fire that was surprisingly hot for such a small creature. The woman cursed and swatted at it with her weapon while the other 2 pirates opened fire wildly, trying to hit the fast-moving dragon. Jake used the distraction to charge the nearest pirate, tackling him into a crystal formation that shattered into thousands of glowing fragments. The man tried to fight back, but Jake had 3 years of pent-up frustration from fixing broken machines, and he put all of it into his fists until the pirate stopped moving. Luna moved like water through the chaos, somehow avoiding every shot, while Copper and Silver joined Spark in attacking the pirates. The dragons might have been small, but their fire was hot enough to melt through armor, and their claws were sharper than any blade. The scarred woman managed to grab Spark out of the air, and Jake heard the little dragon cry out in pain. Luna's eyes turned from their usual nebula color to pure white light, and she spoke a single word in the elf language that made the entire chamber shake. Every crystal in the chamber began singing a note that was felt more than heard, and the pirates grabbed their heads in pain as the sound seemed to come from inside their skulls. The scarred woman dropped Spark, who flew unsteadily back to Luna and tried to run, but the crystal song followed her. Jake watched in amazement as the pirates stumbled and fell, their weapons clattering on the crystal floor. Luna walked over to them and touched each one on the forehead. speaking words in her language that Jake did not understand, but that made the pirate's eyes go blank. When she was done, the pirates stood up and walked out of the chamber. Like sleepwalkers heading back toward their ships, Luna explained that she had not hurt them, but had removed their memories of this place and given them a compulsion to fly their ships into the nearest sun. They would not suffer, but they would never hurt anyone again. Jake picked up Spark, who was favoring one wing, and the little dragon nuzzled against his cheek, making soft chirping sounds that Jake somehow understood meant thank you. Luna smiled and said that the dragons had chosen to accept him as part of their flock, which was an honor no human had received in over 1,000 years. They gathered as many crystals as they could carry and headed back to the ship. But when they reached the landing site, Jake saw something that made his heart sink. A portal of blue light was opening in the air, and through it stepped an elf who could only be Luna's father. He was tall, even for an elf, with silver hair that matched Luna's but styled in complex braids that seemed to hold tiny stars. His armor was definitely magical because it shifted between solid metal and pure light, depending on how Jake looked at it. His sword was strapped to his back and even sheathed. Jake could feel its power like standing too close to a nuclear reactor lord. Selenar of the Third House of Andromeda looked at his daughter with eyes that held disappointment and anger in equal measure. He spoke in the common tongue for Jake's benefit, saying that Luna had broken 17 treaties by bringing a human to this sacred place and that the punishment for such crime was exile from all elf worlds. Luna stood straight and proud, saying she would accept any punishment if it meant saving the last dragons in this sector of space. Her father's expression softened slightly, and he said he had not come to punish her but to test the human who had risked everything to help her. The elf lord drew his sword, and the blade was made of captured starlight that hurt to look at directly. He pointed it at Jake and said that humans claimed to be brave and compassionate, but most were just clever animals who would sell their own mothers for enough credits. Jake wanted to run because every instinct told him that this being could erase him from existence with a thought, but he thought about Spark's pain cry and Luna's desperation to save her dragons, and he stood his ground. He told the elf lord that maybe humans were just clever animals, but animals could love and protect and sacrifice, just like any other species lord. Selenar asked if Jake would die for creatures that were not his kind, and Jake said he would rather die trying to save something beautiful than live, knowing he let it disappear. The dragons flew over to Jake and arranged themselves around him with Spark on his shoulder, copper around his waist, and silver floating beside his head. The elf lord studied this formation for a long moment, then laughed, and it was a sound like distant thunder mixed with music. He said the dragons had performed the guardian circle, which they only did for those they considered worthy of protecting, and no dragon had done this for a human since the first alliance between their species. He sheathed his sword and told Luna that she had chosen well, but there would be consequences for what she had done. The other elf houses would demand justice for bringing a human to the garden, and there were those who would try to take the dragons by force. Luna took Jake's hand and said she did not care about the politics of dead old elves who had forgotten what it meant to actually live. She would protect the dragons, and if Jake was willing, she would teach him the old ways so he could help her. Jake looked at the 3 dragons who were now glowing with health from breathing the crystal-charged air, and then at Luna, whose beauty was beyond anything human but who looked at him like he was something precious. He said yes, without hesitation. Lord Selenar opened another portal and said they had 1 hour to gather what they needed before he would have to report their presence here to the Elf Council. After that, they would be hunted by both elf traditionalists and human corporations who would want the dragons for experimentation. Luna kissed Jake then, and it was like touching a live wire made of starlight and ancient magic. The dragons sang in harmony, and even Lord Selenar smiled, though he tried to hide it behind a stern expression. They had work to do, and not much time to do it, but Jake knew his life would never be boring again. The hour passed faster than Jake had ever experienced as they worked to harvest enough crystals to keep the dragons healthy. For at least a year, Luna showed him how to identify the most potent crystals by their sound when tapped gently, and how to remove them without damaging their healing properties. Lord Selenar stood guard at the entrance to the chamber, and Jake could hear him occasionally unleashing power that made the air crackle when something tried to enter the garden. whether it was more pirates or something worse. Jake did not want to know, but he was grateful for the protection as they worked. Luna explained that the dragons were not just pets, but partners in an ancient symbiosis. With the elves, dragons provided protection and companionship while elves gave them intelligence and magic. Without each other, both species grew weaker, which was why the dragon plague was affecting elf colonies across the galaxy. Spark had recovered from his injury and was helping by using his small size to retrieve crystals from narrow spaces. His blue fire could cut through crystal formations with surgical precision, and he would chirp proudly every time he brought Jake a particularly good specimen. Copper was using his stronger fire to melt crystals into portable liquid form that Luna stored in special containers she had brought. The liquid crystal could be added to the dragon's food and was easier to transport than raw crystals. Silver, being the largest and strongest, was helping to move heavy crystal formations that contained the purest medicine. When their hour was nearly up, Luna pulled Jake aside and pressed something into his hand. It was a small crystal pendant on a chain that glowed with its own inner light. She said it was a communication crystal that would let them stay in contact, no matter how far apart they were, and that it was also a key to certain elf technologies that she would teach him to use. Lord Selenar called out that their time was up, and they needed to leave immediately. Jake could hear explosions in the distance, and the elf lord's face was grim when they reached him. He said the human military had detected the energy signatures from their battle with the pirates and was sending a strike force to investigate. They ran back to the courier ship with the dragons flying overhead keeping watch. The ship's cargo hold was now full of crystals, both raw and liquid, and Luna had to use elf engineering tricks to make them all fit without exceeding the weight limits. As Jake started the launch sequence, Lord Selenar placed his hand on the ship's hull and spoke words that made the metal shimmer. He explained that he had given the ship a blessing of speed and stealth that would last for one journey, but they would need to choose their destination carefully. Luna said they could not go back to the mining station because Jake would be arrested and the dragons confiscated. The elf colonies would not accept a human, and Earth was too polluted for dragons to survive. Lord Selenar suggested something that surprised both of them. There was a planet on the edge of explored space where a small colony of humans and elves lived together in secret, trying to recreate the alliance that had existed centuries ago. It was dangerous and difficult to reach, but it would accept them and the dragons could live freely. There, Jake input the coordinates Lord Selenar provided and saw it would take 3 weeks to reach at maximum speed, assuming they did not run into any patrols or pirates. Luna said she had enough supplies for the journey, and the dragons would be fine with their crystal medicine. Before they launched, Lord Selenar pulled Luna aside for a private conversation, and Jake pretended to be busy with pre-flight checks while the dragons curled up in the co-pilot seat. When Luna returned, her eyes were wet with tears, but she was smiling. Lord Selenar stood back and opened a portal to leave, but before stepping through, he looked at Jake and said that prophecies were usually nonsense, but there was one about a human who would bridge the gap between species and help dragons return to the stars. He said Jake might be that human, or he might just be a lucky fool, but either way, he had earned an elf lord's respect. The portal closed just as the first human military ships appeared on the scanner, and Jake pushed the throttle to maximum. The blessed ship responded like it had been waiting its whole existence for this moment, accelerating faster than should have been possible. Behind them, Jake could see weapon fire lighting up the garden's surface, and he wondered if the crystals would survive the attack. Luna placed her hand over his and said the garden had protected itself for millions of years and would outlast both humans and elves. They jumped to hyperspace just as a massive battleship dropped out of warp directly in their path, and Jake felt the weird sensation of being stretched across infinity. Before snapping back together, Luna was laughing with relief, and the dragons were singing a victory song. For 3 days they traveled in silence, both processing everything that had happened. Jake taught Luna human card games, while she taught him basic elf magic, mainly small things like making light without electricity or purifying water with a touch. The dragons spent most of their time sleeping and growing stronger as the crystal medicine worked through their systems. On the 4th day, they detected a ship following them through hyperspace, which should have been impossible. Luna recognized the signature as an elf hunter ship, probably sent by the traditionalist faction that wanted the dragons returned to die with dignity rather than be saved by human intervention. Jake suggested they drop out of hyperspace and fight, but Luna said the hunter ship was faster and better armed than their courier vessel. Their only chance was to reach the colony before being caught and hope the colonists would protect them. The next 2 weeks were a game of cat and mouse through hyperspace, with Jake pushing the ship beyond its limits, while Luna used every trick she knew to mask their trail. The dragons seemed to understand the danger, and stayed quiet, even Spark, who usually chirped constantly. They dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the colony's system with the hunter ship only minutes behind them. The planet ahead was beautiful, with green continents and blue oceans that reminded Jake of Earth before the pollution. But between them and the planet was a field of automated defense satellites that would destroy any ship without proper authorization codes. Luna tried transmitting the codes her father had given them, but they were old, and the satellites began powering up their weapons. Jake had an idea that was either brilliant or insane, and asked Luna to trust him. He flew straight at the satellites while broadcasting on all frequencies that they had 3 dragons on board who needed sanctuary. For a moment nothing happened, and Jake thought they were about to be vaporized, but then the satellites powered down, and a voice came over the communication system, speaking in a language that was neither human nor elf, but somehow both. The voice said they had been waiting for the dragon bearers to arrive and to follow the guidance beam to the surface. Jake felt relief flood through him as they descended toward the planet, but it was short-lived as the hunter ship dropped out of hyperspace and immediately opened fire. The colonial defense satellites returned fire, but the hunter ship was military-grade and shrugged off the attacks. Luna said she knew who was commanding that ship and that he would never stop hunting them. As they entered the atmosphere with the hunter ship close behind, Jake made a decision that would change everything. Jake turned the courier ship around to face the hunter while still falling backward through the atmosphere, and told Luna to take the controls. The hunter ship was beautiful, in a deadly way, all sharp angles and weapon ports with elf runes that probably meant something like swift death or honor in hunting Luna. Protested, but Jake was already moving to the cargo hold where he had been working on something during their 2-week journey, using spare parts and some of the liquid crystal that Luna had said was too impure for the dragons. He had built what was essentially a crystal bomb that would release all its energy at once in a blast that might disable the hunter's shields. The dragons followed him, and Jake told them to stay with Luna. But Silver ignored him and wrapped around his shoulders like living armor. Copper and Spark took positions on his arms, and Jake realized they were protecting him. He opened the cargo door despite the air screaming past and the heat from atmospheric entry making everything glow. The hunter ship was close enough that Jake could see the pilot through the cockpit window. An elf with cold eyes and scars that marked him as a veteran of many battles. Jake threw the crystal bomb with all his strength, and Silver added a blast of his breath to propel it faster. The device hit the hunter's shields and exploded in a sphere of white light that made Jake's eyes water, even through his closed eyelids. When he could see again, the hunter ship was spinning, out of control, its shields flickering and engines smoking. Luna had used the distraction to level out their descent, and they were now racing toward a city that looked like it had been grown rather than built, with towers that were clearly elf architecture, mixed with human-style buildings. The hunter ship recovered faster than Jake expected and fired a tracking missile that their countermeasures could not shake. Luna tried evasive maneuvers, but the missile matched every move, getting closer with each. Second, Silver suddenly launched himself from Jake's shoulders and flew directly at the missile. The great dragon was still weak from his illness, but he spread his wings wide and breathed a stream of silver fire that was so hot it turned the air itself into plasma. The missile exploded and Silver was caught in the blast. Jake screamed as he saw the dragon tumbling through the air, his beautiful scales blackened and torn. Luna somehow kept flying while tears streamed down her face, and Copper and Spark sang a mournful song that made Jake's chest ache. They landed hard in a field outside the city. With the courier ship's landing gear collapsing from the stress, Jake ran outside and found Silver lying in a crater caused by his impact, still breathing but barely alive. The hunter ship landed nearby, and the scarred elf emerged carrying a weapon that looked like a cross between a sword and a rifle. He said his name was Valeth of the Shadow Guard, and he had orders to return the dragons to the Elf Council, dead or alive. Jake stood over Silver's body and felt something change inside him. The crystal pendant Luna had given him grew hot against his chest, and he could suddenly feel the energy flowing through everything around him, the life in the grass, the power in the air, and the connection between all living things. He told Valeth that he would have to go through him to get to the dragons, and the elf laughed, saying no. Human could stand against a shadow guard who had trained for centuries in combat. But when Valeth attacked, Jake moved without thinking, dodging the energy blade by millimeters. He could see the attack patterns like glowing lines in the air, showing him where the next strike would come. Luna had said humans could not use elf magic, but Jake was doing something that was not quite magic and not quite human intuition. The fight lasted only minutes, but felt like hours, with Jake using moves he should not have known and strength he should not have possessed. Valeth grew increasingly frustrated as this impossible human not only survived, but began to push him back. Copper and Spark joined the battle-breathing fire that forced Valeth to divide his attention, while Luna worked desperately to heal Silver with the pure crystals they had gathered. The scarred elf was skilled enough to fight them all, but he was not expecting what happened next. People began arriving from the city, both human and elf, and some who were clearly children of both species. They formed a circle around the combat and began singing in harmony, their voices creating a resonance that made the air itself vibrate. Valeth stumbled as the song affected him, and Jake saw his chance. He grabbed the elf's weapon and turned it against him, but instead of killing him, Jake used the flat of the blade to knock him unconscious. An elderly human woman and an ancient elf man stepped forward from the crowd and introduced themselves as the colony's leaders. They said they had felt the dragon's arrival through the planetary consciousness that connected all life here, and had come to help. The elf elder looked at Silver and said the dragon was dying, but there was one way to save him. It would require Jake to share his life force with the dragon, creating a permanent bond that would change them both forever. Jake did not hesitate and knelt beside Silver, placing his hands on the dragon's chest. The colonists continued their song, and Jake felt energy flowing from him into Silver, while also feeling the dragon's essence flowing back. The sensation was overwhelming, like becoming more than himself, while still remaining who he was. He could feel Silver's memories of flying through nebulas with Luna, and her ancestors could taste the stellar winds and understand the ancient songs that dragons had sung since the universe was young. Silver's eyes opened, and they were no longer pure gold, but mixed with flecks of human brown. The dragon stood shakily, and Jake found he could understand the dragon's thoughts as clearly as spoken words. Luna threw her arms around both of them, crying with relief, while Copper and Spark danced in the air, breathing celebratory flames. The colonists cheered, and the elder humans and elves smiled, like they had seen something they had been waiting for. Valeth woke up surrounded by armed colonists, but the fight had gone out of him. He looked at Jake, who was still glowing slightly from the bond with Silver, and said he would return to the council, with news that the dragons had died in the crash. No one would come looking for them. The human woman who was the colony's mayor said Jake and Luna were welcome to stay and help build the future where humans and elves lived as equals they could, teach others about the dragon bond, and maybe help heal the ancient rift between the species. Jake looked at Luna, who was smiling with Copper and Spark perched on her shoulders, then at Silver, who was now truly his partner in a way he was still learning to understand. He thought about his old life fixing machines on a mining station and could not imagine going back. 6 months later, Jake stood in a field teaching a group of young humans and elves how to sense the energy that connected all things. Some were better at it than others, but all were eager to learn. Luna was nearby, working with other dragons that had been brought to the colony for healing her. 3 companions having become 5, then 10, then 20. Silver flew overhead practicing aerial maneuvers that combined dragon agility with human creativity, their bond having made both of them stronger than they had been alone. Sometimes Jake could feel the dragon's joy at being alive and healthy, and it mixed with his own happiness, until he could not tell where one ended and the other began. Luna found him after the lesson and took his hand. She said more dragons were being discovered on distant worlds, and the colony was becoming a center for healing them. Would he come with her to find them? Jake looked at the settlement they had helped build, where human and elf children played together while dragons flew overhead. He thought about Earth, where he had been nobody special, and the mining station where he had been just another worker. He squeezed Luna's hand and said yes because being brave meant grabbing the impossible when it was offered, especially when the whole universe was watching. The dragons sang as the sun set, and Jake knew he was exactly where he belonged.